Today we have George Washington, the first President of the United States and the General of the Army for the 13 colonies for the American Revolution. Hello, Mr. Washington, and welcome. It is good to have you.
Great to be here.
So to start off, I'm just going to ask you a few questions about the events leading up to the American Revolution.
Okay.
Why did the colonists want to rebel?
Well, first of all, the British put taxes on almost everything that was being imported from England. This included tea, stamps, sugar. We did not think that this was fair, that they were punishing us for a situation they put themselves in. They also looked down upon us and treated us as if we were incapable of having our own government.
How did you respond to the taxes?
I was mad. I did not think the British were treating us fairly.
Were there any other times when the colonists were being treated unfairly?
Yes. The Intolerable Acts, which is a series of punishments that the British placed on us for various reasons. However, these acts were mainly placed on us because of the way we reacted to some of the other taxes. We were only trying to defend ourselves, but clearly the British took that as a threat.
Tell me about the Boston Port Bill and the Quartering Act, which were two of the punishments, correct?
Yes, they were. The British closed down Boston Harbor until all the expenses of the tea from the Boston Tea Party were paid off. The Quartering Act allowed British troops to stay wherever they pleased, even if it meant intruding in our homes.
Why did this make you all so angry?
It was annoying that the British thought they could force all of this onto us without our consensus.
That's a bummer. What did you do about all this? Were there any alliances formed with other countries?
We fought the British. That's what we did. And yes, the French gave us ammunition, which was extremely helpful considering we did not have much money to buy it. Their navy also helped a great deal in the war with Britain. I was appointed general of the army for the 13 colonies. I knew it would be a challenge, but I led to the army to success, and we broke free from the British.
Congratulations, and thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
The British did many things to make the colonists want to be independent and go to war with them. From putting a tax on almost all goods to controlling the way the colonists were being governed, the British controlled most aspects of how the colonists lived.
The main reason the Pilgrims came on the Mayflower to the New World was so they could have religious freedom, while others came to have overall freedom. Back in England, the king required everyone to be Anglican, even if they were against the beliefs. In the colonies, it was decided that people could choose their own religion and not have to practice what everyone else was.
On the journey to the New World, the Mayflower Compact was signed. This was a document allowing the colonies to be self-governed with what is now called a democracy. In England, the king ruled everything. In the colonies, they could make decisions themselves and not have to deal with the laws the king made. This was one of the main reasons the colonists broke free from their mother country of England.
The British military at the time was a far greater force than the colonies and outnumbered them significantly. They had more men and more money to fund their army, and their soldiers were more trained and skilled. The colonists had a lot of factors on their side as well. The British were fighting a war that was a couple months' travel time away from their home country. Any supplies or messages that took a really long time to get to the British and back.
The colonists believed greatly in what they were fighting for. The British wanted to win, but the soldiers were motivated by their pay more than the outcome of the battles. Back in Britain, many people did not support fighting the war, and it was costing Britain a lot of money to fight and send supplies across the Atlantic. The colonists were fighting on home turf. They knew the land, and they could fight a type of war that British and Hessians were not used to.
The colonists used guerrilla warfare tactics that the British were not used to fighting against. The British and Hessian soldiers were used to standing in lines and shooting, so when the colonists did not use this tactic, the British soldiers were not nearly as effective. The colonists also broke the rules of war at the time and used new inventions like guns with rifled barrels to assassinate high-ranking officers during battles. This angered the British and made it difficult for them to fight effectively with little or no leadership during battles. The French siding with the colonists also helped turn the war more in the colonists' favor. They gave them supplies like gunpowder. The French Navy was an important contribution because the American colonies had very little influence on the seas.
Throughout the duration of the Revolutionary period, the British Parliament passed several acts on the colonists. Among these was the infamous Stamp Act. The Stamp Act passed a legal tax on most paper goods, including cards, legal documents, and newspapers.
Also, the Tea Act was a major event. The British placed a tax on tea. The colonists were so outraged by this that a group of men dressed as Mohawk Indians boarded the ships that carried the tea and threw it overboard into Boston Harbor to rebel. This only led to another punishment, the Boston Port Bill. The bill stated that the Boston harbor was to be shut down until all expenses of the wasted tea were paid back. These are only a few of the many ways the colonists were unfairly treated by the British.
The colonists' rights were violated by the British. No taxation without representation was the famous slogan that represented the British's invasion of the colonists' freedom. They did not think it was fair for the British to put all of these taxes on them when they had no voice in Parliament in making decisions for the colonies.
Even though the Americans didn't have the largest well-equipped army, they still managed to defeat the British.
The battles of Trenton and Princeton were considered moral triumphs, and it helped boost the confidence. The gunpowder that the French supplied them also helped them with their weaponry. The Americans were extremely persistent, and no matter how much damage the British inflicted on them, they never gave up.
The British Army had weaknesses of their own that made it easier for the Americans to win the war. For example, the British fought a war from their home, which meant that it took a while for troops and supplies to reach their destinations. The British also had to convince the American army to give up their claims of independence, which was nearly impossible to do at this point.